Why do some people try to solve their problems all on their own? Why are people from Generation X different from others? Is it a matter of upbringing, or was it the conditions of the era? Today, we are going to talk about this. Generation X, born roughly between the early 1960s and the late 1970s, is often described as independent, self-reliant, and resourceful. These descriptions are accurate, but they rarely go deep enough, because for many members of this generation, independence was never a philosophy they chose. It was a psychological response to the world they were placed into as children. And understanding how that response formed means understanding something important about how human beings adapt when they have no other option. To understand this, you need to look at how a child growing up in that era perceived the world. Not the headlines, not the politics, the feeling, the texture of daily life inside a home where the rules were different from what we know today. Many Generation X children came home from school to an empty house. This was not because their parents were neglectful in any dramatic sense, but because the structure of life demanded it. Divorce rates had risen sharply, single-parent households were becoming common. In two-parent homes, both adults were often working, not to build wealth, but simply to make ends meet. The economy was shifting beneath everyone's feet, and the social safety nets that earlier generations relied on were wearing thin. Parents were busy surviving, and children were left, often quite literally, to figure things out on their own. They had more than one responsibility to handle. The term latchkey kid comes from exactly this: a child who carries a house key around their neck or in their pocket because they know no one will be home when they arrive. It sounds simple, it sounds manageable, but put yourself inside that experience for a moment. You are 8 years old. You walk into a quiet house. There is no one to greet you, no one to ask how your day went. If something goes wrong, a broken window, a strange noise, a feeling of fear, you deal with it. You assess the situation. You decide what to do. You take action, and then you move on. That is not just independence, that is training. The kind that sinks into the nervous system and becomes part of how a person operates for the rest of their life. What makes this psychological formation so powerful is that it happened without any explanation or framing. No one sat these children down and said, "We are teaching you to be self-reliant." There was no curriculum. There was no acknowledgement. The lesson was absorbed through repetition and through absence. And lessons learned that way tend to be the ones that last the longest, because they bypass conscious understanding and settle directly into identity. Over time, the child who comes home to an empty house stops expecting someone to be there. They stop hoping for it. They develop routines. They solve small problems, then bigger ones. They learn to internalize their fear. In many ways, these experiences actually make a person stronger. They learn to read situations and respond practically, because emotional reactions without a witness feel pointless. And slowly, without anyone noticing, including the child themselves, a belief takes root. The belief that relying on yourself is not just a preference, it is the only safe option. This belief was reinforced by the emotional tone of many Generation X households. Even in homes where parents were present, emotional expression was often limited. The parenting culture of the 1970s and 1980s was not oriented toward emotional attunement. Children were expected to be tough. Complaining was not welcomed. Vulnerability was met not necessarily with cruelty, but with discomfort. Many parents simply did not have the language or the modeling to respond to a child's emotional needs in a safe and validating way. Crying was not a solution, so the child adapted. They stopped bringing their problems forward. They stopped sharing what hurt them, not because they stopped feeling, but because they learned that expressing emotions often led nowhere productive. The internal calculation became automatic. If no one is going to help me process this, I will process it myself. If no one is going to fix this, I will fix it myself. And if expressing pain leads to awkwardness or dismissal, I will keep it inside where it is contained and manageable. This is a form of emotional engineering. The child builds an internal system for managing difficulty, and that system works. In fact, it works remarkably well. Generation X grew into adults known for their competence, their calm under pressure, and their ability to troubleshoot without panic. They became the generation that could walk into a crisis and simply start solving it, step by step, without waiting for instructions or validation. But beneath that competence, there is something that is rarely discussed, something quieter, something that usually only becomes visible later in life, during moments of real vulnerability: a health scare, a divorce, the death of a parent, a professional failure. In those moments, the deeply wired instinct to handle everything alone does not always serve the person well. It isolates them. It causes them to stay sealed inside their own experience, solving, managing, and coping, but not connecting, not sharing, not allowing another human being to carry even a small piece of the weight. And this is the part that matters most. Because independence, when it is freely chosen, is a genuine strength. But when it is built on the foundation of emotional absence, it carries a hidden cost. That cost is that asking for help begins to feel not just unnecessary, but dangerous. It feels like exposure, like weakness, like a door that, once opened, cannot be controlled. And so it stays shut, year after year, decade after decade. You might recognize this in yourself or in someone you love. The person who always has a plan. The person who never seems to struggle visibly. The person who, when you ask if they need anything, always says no. Not because they are fine, but because the idea of saying yes feels foreign to them, uncomfortable, almost impossible. This is not stubbornness. This is architecture. It is the result of thousands of small moments in childhood where the message, even if it was never spoken, was clear. You are on your own. And the child who receives that message does not rebel against it. They internalize it. They build their entire emotional structure around it. And by the time they are adults, it is not a behavior. It is who they are. Some children never even had the chance to experience their own emotions because they simply did not have the time for it. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes with this type of self-reliance. It is not the loneliness of being physically alone. It is the loneliness of being surrounded by people and still believing, at some deep level, that no one can truly help. It is the loneliness of believing that the safest place for your problems is inside your own mind. That connection, while pleasant, is not something you can depend on when things get hard. Generation X learned this early. They learned it in empty kitchens and quiet afternoons. They learned it from parents who were doing their best, but who were also overwhelmed, distracted, or emotionally unavailable. They learned it from a culture that valued toughness over tenderness, action over reflection, and solutions over feelings. And they carried those lessons forward with extraordinary discipline. They built families, they built careers. They held things together through economic downturns and personal upheaval with the same steady, quiet competence they developed as children. But many of them also carried something else forward, a deep tiredness that comes from never fully putting the weight down, a longing they might not even have words for, a sense that somewhere along the way, they missed the experience of being truly held by someone else's care. This is not a criticism. It is an observation made with care, because the resilience of Generation X is real and admirable. The current generation struggles greatly with handling multiple responsibilities because running away from them feels easier and safer. But this resilience in Generation X carried them through situations that would have broken people with less practice at endurance. However, resilience built in isolation has a texture of its own. It is harder, more brittle than it appears. And sometimes it prevents the very thing that would make it more sustainable, which is the willingness to let someone else in. If you grew up this way, you may have never questioned it. It may simply feel like the way you are, and in many ways, it is. But it is also worth considering the idea that the independence you carry so naturally was not entirely natural. It was shaped by circumstances, by absences, by a world that asked too much of you too early and gave you too little in return. You solved problems alone because you had no other choice, and you became extraordinary at it. But the quiet truth beneath all of that competence is simple, human, and worth saying out loud. If you have experienced something similar, feel free to share it in the comments. You might set an example for others, but there's one thing I cannot leave unsaid. No one was created to carry everything alone, not even you.